Welcome to lesson 2.2, adding and subtracting integers. Kind of familiar stuff from 6th grade and 7th grade and now moving into pre-algebra in 8th grade. One of the building blocks of this is the inverse property of addition. And it's not so important that you remember that name as it is that you understand the concept that the sum of an integer and its opposite is 0, because you're going to use this for adding and subtracting and for addition and subtraction properties of equality when you solve equations. So if you wanted to add 8 and then the opposite of 8, which is negative 8, and often put parentheses here to separate this operational sign, the plus sign, from the sign of the integer, the negative sign. So that's the other thing the parentheses are there for. That's what they're useful for. That is 0. So n plus the opposite of n is always 0. Important idea. Probably one of the simplest of the 4 things we're going to do in this lesson is adding integers that have the same sign. So let's take a look at positive 8 plus positive 2. And you don't have to put the positive sign, but you can put it in here if you want to. But when there's no sign there, you assume it's positive. This is what you've been doing for a lifetime. That's just positive 10. However, if it's negative 8 plus negative 2, the answer still has an absolute value of 10, but the answer is negative 10. So if both of the integers that you're adding are negative, the answer will be negative. It will be the sum of the absolute values of the two numbers, but it will be a negative answer. If both numbers are positive, it's familiar territory. It's what you've always done. Just add them up and make it positive. So a more complicated kind of incident here is if the integers have different signs. So if you're doing a positive 5 plus a negative 4, for some of you this is very easy. You remember how we did this. And we actually started with counters when we did this kind of problem. So positive 5 would be represented with 5 positive symbols and negative 4 with 4 negative symbols. Then you get these opposites, like that's a 0 pair, 1 positive and 1 negative. Another 0 pair, so that's 0, 0, another 0, another 0. And then you have this one that doesn't have a partner. It's 1 positive, so that's what's left over. So the answer is 1. And you can just, I don't want you to have to draw counters, you're past that, but you can kind of see how the rule works, that if there's more positives than there are negatives, 5 positives and 4 negatives, what's the difference between the 5 positives and the 4 negatives? And the answer would be there's 1, a difference of 1. And that 1, there's 1 more positive than negative. So if it was negative 5 plus positive 4, there are more negatives than there are positives, and it would be negative 1. Think of it, there's different models. You could think of this as your team, you're playing soccer and your team scores 5 goals and other team scores 4 goals. It's negative because that's sort of like putting you in the hole every time the other team scores. But you have scored 1 more goal than they have. So you would win this soccer match by 1. Or it could be that, if we take this example, think about money. You have $4, but you owe your buddy $5. So you basically you have 1 less dollar in your account, basically, than you do assets. So you're a negative 1 in the hole. After you give away these $4, you still owe $1. Once you have mastered addition, you're really already the master of subtraction, because all you need to do to subtract integers, if it's not obvious what you should do, just add the opposite, which we can remember with the keep, change, change idea. So a few examples of that. If you have, well, first of all, if you have a problem like 7 minus 3, which is very obvious, forget the adding the opposite part. And forget the keep, change, change. Just do 7 minus 3 is 4. But if it was 7 minus negative 3, you would probably, some of you are so good at this, you would get it, but it's nice to have something to fall back on. And then the problem with intuition, with these operations with integers is sometimes it fails you because what you think is perfectly obvious is not correct. So you might theorize that this answer is positive 10 or negative 10 or negative 4 or positive 4. But to be sure, if you use the keep, change, change idea, or the rule is to subtract a number, add its opposite. So we're going to keep this number the same. 7 stays. That's the one that keeps. Change the operation to addition. So it becomes 7 plus, and then change the sign of the number that you were subtracting. So it becomes 7 plus 3, which is 10. And in the next slide, we'll just give a few more examples of how this works. Well, let's look at some of the kind of combinations that can make life difficult for you in math class. The first is negative 12 minus 4. So we're going to do keep, change, change. Keep negative 12. Change to add. And then change positive 4 to negative 4. Then the rule for adding when you have the same sign is to both the negative 12 and a negative 4. Just forget the signs and add 12 and 4 and make it negative, because when you add two negative numbers you get a negative. Example number 2, we're going to keep 16 and change subtraction to addition and change negative 3 to positive 3. Subtraction to addition, negative 3 to positive 3. So we have 16 negatives and 3 positives. We have more negatives. How many more negatives do we have? What's the difference between 16 and 3, which is 13? And it's a negative 13. And this is exactly what you can do. I mean, you don't, when you have this subtraction, you can copy down the subtraction problem and you can just work with changing this to addition. You don't need to come over here and write equals and a whole bunch of other stuff here. So it's really not very tedious. It doesn't take a lot of extra work. You're just going to go plus, minus. Then you write equals. So there are 6 positives, 12 negatives, more negatives than positives, and how many more? 6. And they're negatives. So when you have it, you can set it up, when you have these problems to do, you can set them up left to right and just go keep, change, change, and then write your answer.